Welcome back to Law News Network, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. We are covering the Harvey Weinstein situation right now, this case that's taken the nation by storm. Harvey Weinstein, renowned film producer and studio executive, has been fired by the Weinstein Company, the very company where he co-chaired with his brother Bob Weinstein. This has all been in response to the New York Times article chronicling accusations that Mr. Weinstein had sexually assaulted employees and actresses. We had Rachel Stockman on earlier to talk about that, as well as her interview with Lisa Bloom, who was representing Harvey Weinstein. But now we have with us to talk about this is entertainment and sports attorney Seth Berenzweig. Seth, it's great to see you again on the Law News Network.
Always a pleasure.
So I know we have you for a little bit today. I want to try and get to the big points. What are his legal options moving forward, either against the board or even against the New York Times? A guy in Harvey Weinstein's position who is at the top of the entertainment world is now toxic and no one wants to touch him. What does he need to do?
Sure. So it was surprising that Harvey Weinstein did take a jab at the New York Times. I don't believe that he has any options that are viable against the New York Times. Aside from being a terrible PR move, it was really baseless from a legal standpoint. He has absolutely no viable recourse against the New York Times. The one general allegation that he's tried to stand on is to say that he wasn't given an opportunity to reply and that he was only given 24 hours to provide a response. First of all, that in and of itself wouldn't be a violation, and secondly, they're pretty clear that they gave him at least 48 hours. Given the stature of the report, the details in the reporting, and the information that was provided, I don't think that he really has any viable claim against the New York Times. With regard to his rights against the company, the one wrinkle on this case, which I think is interesting, that has been a little bit of a low-key aspect, is that the board was very clear when it made its decision that they were terminating his employment. However, Harvey Weinstein is a significant shareholder of the company, along with his brother. Just because they terminated him in terms of his status as an employee provides no indication that they've separated him from the company, given his rights as a shareholder. So I think that the company is kind of an accidental beneficiary of a little bit of a misperception by those generally thinking that he's been completely terminated from the company. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. There's been no indication that his rights as a shareholder have been severed or terminated in any manner at all, and therefore any kind of a presumption by those that are listening to this unbelievable story that he's been separated from the company is probably a misperception on their part.
So let me make sure I understand this. A, he still has a stake in the company, he's still receiving money from the company, and if he's a significant shareholder as we believe, he might still have a say in the company. Am I correct in what I'm assuming here?
That's exactly right. I think that you've said it precisely right, because he has a financial stake in the company. The board of directors acts at the pleasure of the shareholders. Now, granted, he is one of many shareholders, but he and his brother own approximately 42% of the company's stock. So I think that he ultimately didn't have much of a choice in terms of terminating his employment role there, just given the floodgate of valid criticism here. But you're absolutely right. He's still in the background as a shareholder. That's one piece that I think is a little bit of an unspoken part of this very surprising story.
What happens to the state of the industry because of his firing? Let's not forget, I could probably put 5 people that are the most powerful people in all of Hollywood. He was at the top of that list, or he's one of the people at the top of the list. What happens to the industry after his firing and about all the projects that he was involved in? And sure, yes, his company can move forward without him, but he was integrally involved in many projects, many film projects, many TV projects. What happens now with his firing? How does this affect the industry?
Sure. Well, the company is affected because they're going to be hampered probably with some kind of a floodgate of litigation, which means that that'll affect their ability for financing. As far as the industry more broadly, we really are in what I would call kind of a post-Gretchen Carlson world, where there is a further heightened awareness of what's going on in corporate America with regard to how people are being treated in the workplace. So I think that this is going to continue to add to that heightened awareness. People who were once very powerful are recognizing that they can't hide behind the veil of power. You can ask Bill O'Reilly. I'm sure that he would reluctantly admit that. Roger Ailes is no longer with us, but I think that we really are looking at an environment where there's an increased awareness in these kinds of cases, and therefore the corporate world is going to have to be a little bit more careful, not only with regard to making sure that they root out this kind of repulsive behavior, but to really take a more realistic expectation and view from the beginning, not to be reactive, but to be proactive. Why would a company such as this at issue in the news say that they're going to be launching an investigation at this late date, despite the fact that this kind of conduct went on for nearly 30 years? Why did Fox News announce that it was going to be hiring a firm to investigate the conduct of Bill O'Reilly after that conduct had allegedly been going on for several years? If you don't have regular processes and investigative procedures in place, then you're really opening up the door to this kind of conduct. So hopefully this is going to be a wake-up call and a warning signal to companies in and out of the media space that they need to be more careful to execute best practices.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is just the start and we see more executives in other companies and people in the entertainment industry being exposed. Again, I'm speaking here. I can't verify any of the accusations against Mr. Weinstein, whether they're true or not. But if you're assuming them to be true, then it's very possible other people will be exposed as well, because we are in a different climate, and thankfully for the better. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I do have a question, though, about what we've seen in the past where settlements, where Harvey Weinstein had these women sign NDAs, he settled with them. Can you speak a little bit about this culture? Because I'm unfamiliar with it, where people know secrets about someone else. And again, I've seen NDAs in companies, but now you're talking about behavior. Can you speak a little bit about these settlements and these NDAs, how that would work in this situation?
Sure. So one of the reasons why a Harvey Weinstein is able to continue to shroud himself in a veil of secrecy is not only because of his power going into these kinds of interactions, but also on the back end with regard to the settlement agreements. These settlement agreements typically have an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which provides typically that in exchange for the payment of money, which some people could call hush money, these folks are not going to disclose any of the nature of the details or any of the allegations. And in fact, these clauses often also have provisions that say that if they're even served with any kind of legal process, like a subpoena, to provide information in response to any kind of an inquiry, even a governmental inquiry, such as from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they often promise that they won't do anything until they provide a notice and an opportunity to respond to the company. So these are very powerful, these are very binding, and this is part of the culture that has existed at Harvey Weinstein's company that has wrapped up a lot of these instances, reportedly at least 8 of those, in non-disclosure agreements, which has created this culture of silence surrounding the company for so many years.
Seth, let's talk about his company. There was a memo that Rachel Stockman had mentioned earlier when we were interviewing her. This was a memo that Harvey sent privately to some top executives. It says, "We believe what the board is trying to do is not only wrong, but might be illegal and would destroy the company. If you could write this letter backing me, getting me the help and time away I need, and also stating your opposition to the board firing me, it would help me a lot." What do you think about that memo?
Well, it's a desperate act by a desperate guy. The board has a fiduciary duty to all of its shareholders and all of its stakeholders to make sure that it operates in a reasonable manner and to take actions that are consistent with its duties to protect the best interests of the company. It's extraordinary for someone as a shareholder, even without this kind of terrible alleged conduct, but especially in the presence of it, to try to reach out and get people to come in and provide external pressure to the board. And I think it really just shows someone who's drowning and is trying to clutch out for a life preserver at the last second. But ironically, he still probably holds his shareholder status in the company. So there certainly has been a price paid by him, but it's not quite as complete a price as many may suspect.
But illegal? They use the term illegal. What do you think about that? Is it actually illegal to fire him?
No, I don't think it's illegal at all. The only way that it would be some kind of a breach would be if there's some kind of an employment contract that provides him a guaranteed continued employment in perpetuity. But there's something that could be as simple as what you call the first breach rule that says that if somebody under a contract commits a first breach by, for example, allegedly being a predator and thinking that it's halfway reasonable to call business meetings with female executives in his shower, he's probably not going to have much of a leg to stand on to say that he's acted in a compliant way to then assert any kind of insistence that the board should find him immune from termination. So an act of desperation, yes. A position that has any kind of legal viability to it whatsoever, I would say absolutely not.
Seth Berenzweig, thank you so much. Amazing discussion about this case. I can't believe it. It's unbelievable what's happened in the course of a week and a half. Amazing. Again, a guy went from the top of the entertainment world to now toxic. No one wants to touch him. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight.
Always a pleasure.